Today I want to show you the easiest way to make a reversible quilt as you go block. Hi, I'm Kim Jamison Hurst of Chatterbox Quilts, and I've shared lots of different ways to make quilt as you go blocks, but I've never talked about how to make a reversible one. And I want to share with you today the easiest way to do this. And it's really very simple. You're going to use one fabric for the front, the top of your quilt block, and one for the back. Okay, so sort of like a whole cloth, if you will. So I've got an example here. This particular one, I did ruler work on it, but you could do this with free motion quilting or with walking foot quilting. So here's the front, and here is the back. So I've used different fabric on the back, as you can see. Now, there are lots of different options for doing this technique, but the first one I want to talk about is what you're seeing here, where I've used a solid-ish, so you could either use a solid or a solid-ish fabric for the front. This happens to be Michael Miller fabric, actually. And then I've used a patterned fabric on the back. Now, when you're doing this method, much like whole cloth, you want the quilting to shine. So in this case, I've used white thread on here so that you can see the quilting design, because the fabric, while gorgeous, isn't super interesting, right? What you want to see when you're doing whole cloth, or in this case, a reversible quilt as you go block, is you want to see the quilting on it because you're using a solid piece of fabric on the front. There's no piecing. That would be interesting to look at, right? Okay, so that's the first thing to keep in mind. And I did mention that I've used white thread on here, contrasting thread. That's always a good idea because you do want that quilting to shine. So consider the color of thread you'll be using in this particular application as well. Now, I have some other options I want to share with you, but before I do that, I want to bring your attention to an icon you'll see below this video, and that is a heart with a $ in it. And that is your opportunity to support the Chatterbox Quilts YouTube channel. So for as little as $2, you can donate any amount of money you would like, and that helps to support my small business. And if you would care to do that, I would be very grateful. Now, what other options do you have when you're doing this very simple kind of whole cloth quilt as you go reversible block? Quite a mouthful, right? Well, let's talk about a variety of options. Okay, so we have a solid fabric here. Now, theoretically, I'm going to be putting this together, putting more blocks together and creating a larger project. So if I wanted to do that, I could do a couple different things. And right now I'm just going to talk about your options for the top fabric. Again, keeping in mind you want to keep it probably simple with a solid or solidish fabric. So you could take this block, let's say we're going to make 9 blocks, okay? You could take maybe 8 of these in the same color. Maybe you're going to do them all in one color, and then maybe the center block is going to be a different color, okay? So you could do that, and if you were going to do that, what would be interesting is to have the same block design, the same, I should say, quilting design, quilting motif on all the blocks, okay? So you're going to have, you know, mostly the same color in it, except for that center block, which is going to shine. Now, you can have all the same motifs, or maybe you want to change and have a different motif in that center block. So that decision is up to you. So that's one option for the top, the fabric choices. Okay, what about if you wanted to have different fabrics in each of the blocks? Again, we're talking about 9 different blocks. So in each of the 9 different blocks, you have different colors. And you could have, again, the same motif. I would probably do that because the fabric is changing, right? So keep the motif the same. Or you could even keep it simpler and just choose maybe a couple colors and alternate them. And then again, have the same color, the same design, I should say. Getting mixed up between my fabric and my quilt motifs, but you know, it all has to come together, right? What about if you had the same fabric in the top, every block was the same fabric, but you changed up the quilt motif, so every motif was different. And again, I would focus on, if you're looking at 9 blocks, I would focus on that center block and make it something that stands out just a little bit more than the other quilt motifs that you've chosen. So those are some options for the quilt top fabric and what you could do there, and the motifs you could choose as well. But what about the back? Because remember, this is a reversible quilt, so you want the back to be interesting as well, right? So let's talk about options for the back. Now, on this particular one, I've got a patterned fabric, and you could certainly stick with that. You could have the same patterned fabric all across the back, which would give it the look of, you know, kind of a traditional quilt that we do where we have one fabric on the back. And if you're doing that, and if you have fabric that's like this, these are like little globes, and this is a directional fabric. So if you do have are using directional fabric, you want it to be all the same fabric on the back, pay attention to what direction that your fabric is going, right? Because if you want them all going the same way, maybe you don't. Maybe you want to alternate them up and down. I don't know. But just be aware if you're using directional fabric, which direction it's going. All right? So you could use the same fabric all across the back, as I said, looking like a traditional quilt, traditional quilt that's made, I should say, without the quilt as you go method, made with a traditional method, right? You could do that. Or switch it up again. So maybe you want to alternate two different colors on the back. Okay, maybe you want to have, and I'm talking about solid fabric now. Okay, let's talk about solid fabric. So you could have two different colors and alternate them as you go along. Or, similar to what I do with the top, you could have 8 blocks the same and the one in the center a different color. So that's some of the options you could do there. But in this particular case, as you can see, I've used a patterned fabric, and you could still do that as well, of course. When you use a patterned fabric, you don't see the quilting design as much, which is okay on the back, I suppose, although it's going to be reversible. But again, you can have that show up more by your thread choice. So keep that in mind. So if you want to use patterned fabric, same thing. You could have, like I just mentioned before, the same patterned fabric all across. Or you could change up your patterned fabric and you could have different ones, maybe a couple. You could use, leftover fabric. Depends on how big your block is. If you were using small blocks, maybe 6 inches finished, maybe you have scraps that you can use. And that'd be a great way to use them up on the back of your quilt blocks. So those are just some of the options that you could use to change up the front of the quilt and change up the back of the quilt, so that it's going to be a really interesting reversible quilt. Something else you could consider, especially on the back of the quilt, is using some seasonal fabrics. So perhaps you wanted to use some winter type designs or Christmas designs, Christmas fabric. You could put those on the back, and then you could turn that quilt over when it's that time of the year. So just a few ideas for you when you're making this really easy, really the easiest, quilt as you go block. Think of it as a whole cloth. The only difference is that you're constraining your designs to individual blocks. Rather than in a whole cloth quilt, you often will start in the center and build that design out. In this particular case, you're going to have motifs on every single block. So consider different types of fabric, consider different quilt motifs, consider the color of your thread you want to make that design pop, certainly on the front of your quilt as you go block. Thanks so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this video. And before you go, you now know the easiest way to make a reversible quilt as you go block, but you might be wondering about what other kinds of quilt as you go blocks can I make? Well, don't worry. Check out this video over here, and I've got another suggestion for you. For more helpful quilting information, please go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.